Hey y'all, so for this week we are starting our own business and talking about the startup costs and all of that, and the fixed and variable costs and all of that. So the company that I'm starting is Double D Trucking, which is going to be a dump truck company that is based out of Mooresville. So I've talked about this before, but that's kind of in the field that I work with, and I do a lot of stuff with that, so I kind of know about that stuff. So that's why I decided to do this. And I decided to do it in Mooresville just because of the demand that I see in that area doing the stuff that I do. So for the startup costs, in order to start, one of the most important things that I'd have to do first is obviously buy a dump truck. You can't have a company without a truck, so that's kind of important. I would probably just get a used one. There's no need to have a brand new one. More money than it's really worth. The payment on that, though, would be a fixed cost. Because it's the same every month and doesn't matter whether I do work, don't do work, whatever, it's going to be the same amount either way. I would probably also just start my business, starting out, I would just run it from my house kind of thing. I have a little shop on my farm that I can do whatever I need to there, and that would save money on rent and utilities and stuff like that. So I wouldn't have to do that, at least in the beginning, until I kind of got on my feet and got started. So some other costs, they're more like startup costs that you don't have to do all the time or yearly or monthly or whatever, but still have to pay for. So I'd have to have a license, more for my name. That's being in the city limits of Mooresville. You have to have a privilege license, what gives me my business name, all of that stuff. As soon as you start a business, obviously you're going to accrue taxes and all of that stuff, so that's something that you're going to have to take into consideration. Taxes are considered a variable cost just because it does depend on either how much money you spend, how much money you make, that kind of thing. So that's something that you'd have to take into consideration. The amount of money that I made would be a fixed cost just because I would be a officer or more salary based rather than hourly or whatever. So that would be considered a fixed cost. So within 3 years, what would the cost be? So depending on how work is, that kind of depends on where exactly this goes, but I'm going to explain what my ideal situation would be if everything goes the way that I would hope it went. So hopefully within a year I would be able to hire a driver so that I could do all of the office stuff and be more of the manager and president of the company rather than an actual driver. One thing that I would do and this is throughout the whole process, I would kind of keep up with, I'd be kind of strict on maintenance and stuff like that on any of the vehicles or equipment that I had, just so I wouldn't have to spend as much on repairs. So it's kind of one of those things, you don't really want to pay the money to keep up with it all the time, but I think in the long run it will save money on your repair costs. So that would be a variable cost though, because that would change kind of depending on what happens, how often you use it, how many miles are on each vehicle and equipment, and the hours on the equipment and stuff like that. So that's going to change from time to time and isn't going to be the same all the time. So another thing that I will have bought or would look into buying within the beginning kind of first year, after the first year, whatever, would be a fuel tank, because fuel at the business I work for now, we spend an ungodly amount of money on fuel. So being a company that would drive every day for 10-12 hours a day, I'm gonna go through a bunch of fuel, and it is cheaper if you have a fuel tank on site or on my property, so that I would be able to fill up my trucks rather than going to an actual station to fuel up. So that's one thing that I would do to save money. But even so, filling up the fuel tank is still going to be a variable cost, because that's going to depend. If it rains for 4 days straight, I'm not going to run my trucks for those 4 days because I'm not going to have work. So then my fuel bill for the month may not be as much as if I ran all 30 days of the month. and that kind of thing, like even on Saturdays and stuff like that sometimes. So it would depend on like how much work I had and stuff like that. So that's still going to be considered a variable cost. So then hopefully by the second year or so, I will have bought a second truck as well as hired another driver. So both of my drivers are going to be hourly. I think that's the best way to do it. That's how we do it now at my company, and it seems to work best. So that is going to be a variable cost because they're hourly based and it's not a salary. So that too depends on the amount of work that we have. So the truck payments from all the trucks will be a fixed expense because it's a payment amount that is from wherever I borrow the money for the truck, whether it be a bank or through a company itself. The payment on that will be a fixed expense. Hopefully within that second year, I will also have an office space. I will have grown enough that I can have my own office, kind of get out a little more and get out on my feet, hopefully to establishing more of a thorough ground to stand on. So with that, I would have some rent that went along with that and utilities, which rent will be the same every month regardless. But the utilities, the amount may vary from time to time, but it's still going to be roughly the same whether I have 30 days of work or 21 days of work. Like if I only work 3 weeks versus a full month, depending on the weather or how much work I have or whatever, that's not really going to change a whole lot. So that's going to be a fixed cost as well. So hopefully, like, continuing on, I would just continue to purchase trucks, have as much as I can, get as much work as I can to bring in as much profit as I can. So hopefully, finally by year 3, I would have at least another dump truck, maybe a road tractor and trailer to do some heavy hauling and stuff like that, because that's another area of something that I would like to get into. Both of those will be fixed costs, payment amounts just the same as the other dump trucks as well. So another thing that I would probably do at that point would be some credit cards that I would give to my drivers. When you're on the road like that, sometimes it's easier just to let your drivers have their own credit card in case they need it. If there's a flat tire, if there's something that happens, they can just pay for it with their card instead of having to go through me. My company does that now. It works out really well. We monitor them very thoroughly. That's actually something that I do now. I go through every charge. If it doesn't match up to something like a receipt that we have that matches to a certain vehicle or whatever, we ask our employees about it. So that's something that I would probably do. And that would be a variable cost because it depends on what exactly they're buying or purchasing or whatever they have to fix, repair. Sometimes they may not have anything to fix. Sometimes they may have a whole bunch of stuff to fix. So that would be a variable cost as well. One thing, I mentioned this earlier, but taxes are one thing that's going to, throughout this whole process, is going to be a variable cost because that's going to depend on how much money we make, how much money I have to pay out for payroll and stuff like that. All of my drivers will be hourly, so that will be a variable expense depending on the work, as I talked about earlier. So I think that's about it that I can think of kind of off the top of my head. There's probably some more in there too, but I think that hits the big ones. So thanks, y'all.